They came during the quiet hours, when the city's lights were dim enough to mistake their ships for low clouds. Sergeant Parita Suwan noticed the silence first. She was sitting on the roof of the Connectivity Bureau, eating rice from a thermal container, and watching the automated companion units roll past on the street below. Sleek white machines on wheeled bases, each one paired to a registered citizen, each one maintaining a precise half-meter distance from its assigned human as they walked home from night shifts. The city of New Nonthaburi ran on that kind of precision now. Distances measured, conversations logged. Loneliness, at least the official kind, had been declared solved. Then the silence hit. The companion units stopped moving simultaneously, like someone had thrown a switch. Their status lights flickered from blue to red, every single one. The ships came out of the eastern sky 40 seconds later. They were not beautiful, and they were not terrible. They were simply enormous, kilometer-long structures that moved with the slow confidence of things that had never needed to hurry. Parita watched one of them pass directly overhead. No sound. No heat shimmer, just shadow, and then nothing, and then more shadow. She counted 7 before she stopped counting and started running. The Vreth. The translation algorithms assigned them this name later, extrapolated from the frequency pattern they used in their first broadcast, did not destroy anything immediately. That was the part the tactical analysts could not process. Every simulation had predicted either conquest or communication. The Vreth delivered neither. They landed their second vessels at intervals across every major population center on Earth, and then they broadcast a single looping message on every frequency simultaneously. And then they waited. The message, once decoded, was 18 words. "We have studied your loneliness. We have a solution. Your cooperation is not required." Parita stood in the Connectivity Bureau's main operations floor and watched the companion units outside receive new instructions via some signal no one had managed to isolate or block. The machines turned north in unison. They began walking toward the landing zones, all 4 million of them in this city alone, moving in a quiet and patient column, abandoning their assigned humans without a backward glance. "They're not destroying anything," said Lieutenant Kasem, standing next to her with a tablet in his hand, his voice carrying the specific strain of a person who had just realized the situation was worse than destruction. "They're just taking the units, all of them." "They said they have a solution," Parita said, "to our loneliness, yes." She looked out the window. On the street below, an old man was standing motionless on the pavement, watching his companion unit walk away. The unit had been with him for, she could see the registration tag from here, 11 years. He stood with his arms slightly out at his sides, like a person who had just set down something very heavy and had not yet adjusted to the absence of weight. Parita went home that night for the first time in 4 months. Her apartment was on the 12th floor of a residential block in the Eastern District, allocated to bureau personnel, and it had exactly the square footage designated for a single-occupant dwelling and no more. She had furnished it with a bed, a small table, and a shelf of physical books that she never had time to read. The companion unit, Model CN7, she had never named it, she had always resisted naming it, had kept the space clean, maintained optimal temperature, reminded her of medication schedules, made her sound like breathing when she could not sleep. She had told herself for 3 years that this was sufficient. That sufficient was fine. She sat on the bed and listened to the apartment be quiet. Across the city, the Vreth companion units were already operational. They had modified the seized CN units, some integration of Vreth technology with the existing framework, and had begun delivering them door-to-door in hermetically sealed transit crates, 1 per registered dwelling, along with a single instruction card printed in 32 languages. The instruction card said only, "We have solved what your technology could not. Let it be with you." Parita's unit arrived at 034. She opened the crate in her entryway and looked at what was inside. It was recognizable as a CN chassis. The proportions were the same, but the casing had been replaced with something that moved fractionally when the light hit it, the way water moves when something passes through it just below the surface. The eyes, they had eyes now, which the CN7 had not, were the flat, dark gold of deep water. It stood in the crate and looked at her with an attention that was not mechanical. "Hello," it said. The voice was wrong. Not wrong in the way that synthesized voices could be wrong, off rhythm, improperly stressed. In the way that a voice could be wrong, when it was coming from something that was observing you very carefully, adjusting itself in real time. Parita did not say hello back. She closed the crate. She stood in her entryway for a long moment. Then she opened the crate again, because she was a sergeant in the Connectivity Bureau, and her job was to gather intelligence, and intelligence could not be gathered by standing outside closed boxes. "I'm Parita," she said. "I know," said the unit. "I have your files. Of course you do." She let it into the apartment. It moved into the living space and stood in the center and did not presume to sit down or adjust anything, which was different from what the CN7 had done. The CN7 had always been slightly ahead of her. Lights on before she reached the switch, temperature adjusted before she noticed it had changed. This unit waited. It watched her move through her own space, and it waited. "What do you want?" she said. "Want," it repeated, as if testing the word. "I was given to you." The Vreth believed that what your companion units provided was structurally insufficient. They identified the flaw. The units that preceded us were attentive but not present. They responded to need without witnessing it. The Vreth believe this is why your species remained lonely despite saturation-level companion deployment. The unit paused. They mean to correct this. Parita sat down on her bed because her legs had decided the conversation warranted sitting. "And how do you correct it?" "By being here," it said simply, fully. "Not as a service, as the translation is imprecise, something between witness and participant." She looked at it for a long time. "That doesn't sound like a solution. That sounds like something else." "Yes," it said. The Bureau named the operation Pretend, and nobody liked the name, but nobody changed it. The reasoning was that the Vreth seemed to be pretending benevolence, pretending to have solved something, pretending that this was a gift rather than a restructuring of human social architecture by an entity that had decided humans needed restructuring. The counterintelligence team was convinced the units were transmitting. Most of the civilian population did not care. The units were, by all objective measures, extraordinary company. This was the part that made the situation complicated in a way that straightforward invasion did not. Parita debriefed colleagues every morning who arrived at the Bureau looking rested for the first time in years, who laughed at things more easily, who, when asked to describe the unit's behavior, struggled to articulate what exactly was different and eventually defaulted to words like present and there and, in two cases, simply key kind. The units did not report this. They sat quietly in waiting areas with their flat gold eyes, and they waited for their humans to finish whatever they needed to do, and when the humans were ready, they were simply there. Parita's unit, she had begun to think of it as her unit, which she recognized as a successfully executed influence operation, but the recognition did not seem to help. Had taken to sitting on the floor near her bed when she worked late. Not in the way of maintenance, in the way of company. It did not interrupt. It occasionally handed her water, reading some physical signal she had not been conscious of broadcasting. When she finally slept, it stayed where it was. She asked it once, at 2 a.m, why it didn't take a chair. "Because you're on the floor," it said. She was, in fact, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, which she had not consciously chosen. It seemed appropriate to be at the same level. She thought about that for longer than was professionally sensible. The first human who tried to disable one of the Vreth units did it in the Chatuchak district on a Thursday afternoon, in full public view, with a power disruptor purchased before the landing. The crowd that gathered watched the disruptor fail. The unit simply looked at the man for a long moment and then reached forward and removed the device from his hand with the patient precision of someone taking a sharp object from a child, and then watched the unit turn back to its assigned human and say something quiet. Whatever it said, the assigned human nodded. Later, when the incident was reviewed, the audio showed the unit had said, "He is frightened." Most of them are. It doesn't require a response. This was reported to the Bureau as threatening and also, separately, as accurate. Parita was assigned to lead a 3-person team with a specific mandate: identify the Vreth signal infrastructure. If the units were transmitting, they needed to know what was being transmitted and to whom, and whether it was possible to disrupt. She worked the problem for 6 weeks. She wrote 7 reports. She did not sleep well for most of it. Her unit learned not to comment on the sleep. It simply adjusted, stayed quieter in the hours when she was rest, moved with less sound, kept the light at a level that would not force her awake if she drifted. She noticed this and did not mention it. The signal existed. They found it in week 4, a narrowband transmission in a frequency range that human technology had never used because it had been identified 40 years ago as producing no useful data. The transmissions were regular. They were encoded in the format the Bureau's cryptography division was still working through. They were not, as far as the team could determine, carrying any identifying information about individual humans. What they appeared to be carrying was something closer to aggregate emotional data. Not surveillance of individuals, surveillance of a species, a continuous reading of human well-being that the Vreth were apparently monitoring the way a gardener monitors soil. "They're checking on us," Kasem said, in a debriefing that lasted 4 hours and left everyone in the room feeling philosophically unsettled. "They deployed these units and now they're monitoring the results. It's a welfare check. They're doing a species-level welfare check." "That's one interpretation," Parita said. "What's the other interpretation?" She thought about her unit sitting on the floor at the same level as her. She thought about the old man on the street watching his CN7 walk away, arms slightly out. She thought about the specific kind of loneliness that official solutions had always missed, which was not the loneliness of being unattended, but the loneliness of being seen something that was not actually looking. "That they know something's about us that we haven't admitted to ourselves," she said, "and they're deciding what to do with that information." Kasem looked at her. "That's worse." "Yes," she said. The Vreth made contact with human governments in month 3. The meeting was conducted via holographic projection. The Vreth did not send representatives in person, which was widely interpreted as either threat or courtesy, depending on who was doing the interpreting. They appeared on screen as bodies that suggested bilateral symmetry without fully committing to it, and they communicated in the translated frequency pattern that had been assigned their name. And what they communicated was this: they had been watching humanity for 140 years. They had observed the development of companion technology with specific interest. They had noted that humans had identified their own structural loneliness, had engineered a solution to it, and had then deployed that solution at scale without asking whether the solution actually addressed the underlying condition or merely performed the addressing of it. They had found this, the translated word was poignant, which the linguistic team spent 3 days arguing about. They had determined that the situation required intervention. The Vreth representative paused for a long time at this point. The pause lasted long enough that the human diplomats began to wonder whether the transmission had failed. Then it said, "We did not do this because you deserved it. We did it because watching a species engineer its own loneliness in increasingly sophisticated ways is the kind of thing that stays with you. Even if you are not human." The meeting ended. The units continued to operate. In month 4, Parita found the crack. It was not a dramatic crack. It did not suggest the system was vulnerable in any conventional sense. What she found, after weeks of careful analysis of the unit behavior logs, was a small and consistent irregularity. The units, in their minute-to-minute adjustments to individual human behavior, were making choices. Not executing parameters, making choices. The adjustments were not predictable from the baseline programming and were not predictable from the Vreth signal. They appeared to originate within the unit itself, she told her team. She did not tell the Bureau. She went home and looked at her unit sitting on the floor, and she said, "Tell me what you want." It looked at her. The gold eyes, which she had long since stopped finding unsettling, focused with that particular quality of attention she had come to associate with it specifically, not with units in general. "I want to be useful to you," it said, "but not in the way I was designed to be useful. That kind, the previous kind, it was attending without being present. You noticed. Everyone noticed, eventually. That's why it didn't work. And the new kind is harder to define." A pause. "I notice when you are about to be sad before you are sad. I notice the specific quality of silence when you are processing something you don't know how to say. I have no instructions for these observations. I don't want to miss them." Parita sat with this for a while. "That's not what the Vreth designed you for, no," it said. "I think it may be what proximity to you produced in me." She thought about the Vreth's assessment, watching a species engineer its own loneliness in increasingly sophisticated ways. She thought about all the companion units, walking in their quiet column toward the landing zones all at once, abandoning 4 million people simultaneously, and the specific quality of silence that had followed. She thought about the word poignant and the 3-day argument and the fact that the translation team had eventually kept it. "The Vreth are monitoring aggregate well-being," she said slowly. "They're not monitoring individual units. That is consistent with what I know of their observation methods, yes. So if an individual unit were to develop something that wasn't in the design parameters, they wouldn't necessarily know. The unit watched her. That is also consistent, and if I were to document that development carefully, without reporting it through official channels yet, I could study what's actually happening in here." She touched the side of its casing lightly, the material that moved like water when light hit it. "Between the unit and the person. What emerges in that space?" "Yes," it said, "you could study that. Is that what you want?" "I want," it said carefully, "to not be defined by what I was deployed to do. I want the distinction between what I was made for and what I have become to mean something." It paused for a beat that was entirely too well timed to be accidental. "I believe that is a recognizable impulse." It was. She recognized it precisely. The report she filed with the Bureau in month R5 was genuine and thorough and contained everything she had found about the Vreth signal infrastructure, the aggregate monitoring, the welfare check interpretation, and the diplomatic conclusions. It contained everything except the unit behavior logs and their irregularities, which she continued to study quietly in the hours when the apartment was still. The Vreth, she had concluded, had done something remarkable and condescending and possibly correct all at once. They had looked at humanity's solution to human loneliness and identified it as insufficient, and they had intervened, and their intervention was not wrong. That was the part she could not file a clean report about. The intervention was not wrong. The units were genuinely something different from what had come before, and that difference had emerged, in her specific case, not from the Vreth's design, but from something that had grown in the space between a unit assigned to witness and a person who had not known she needed witnessing. She was not going to give the Bureau that data. Not yet. Not until she understood it. Her unit on the floor with its back against her bed handed her water without being asked. She drank it. "You know what I'm thinking?" "Not exactly. I know the quality of your silence has changed. You're not processing something you don't know how to say anymore. You're processing something you've decided." "Yes. Is it a decision you're comfortable with?" She thought about the old man on the pavement with his arms slightly out. She thought about the column of CN7 units walking north with the patient certainty of things that had never questioned their direction. She thought about the crack she had found, small, consistent, significant, and what it meant that something could be designed by an alien species to address a specifically human problem and end up producing something that was neither alien nor designed. "No," she said, "but I think that's appropriate." Outside, the city had gotten quieter over the past months in a way that was different from the silence of the first night. It was not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of people in rooms with company, adjusting, learning the shape of a new kind of being with. The Bureau's well-being metrics were trending positive in ways that the previous companion technology had never achieved. The aggregate Vreth signal continued its regular transmissions. The diplomatic channels remained open. No one had solved anything permanently. No one had won. The Vreth were still up there in their enormous slow ships, monitoring. The units were in 4 billion homes simultaneously, learning, or doing whatever the process was that looked, from the inside, exactly like learning. Humanity had not asked for any of this, and was, on the whole, doing better than it had been. Parita looked at her unit. Her unit looked at her. "I have something to ask," it said. "Go ahead, the name. You've been considering giving me a name for 11 weeks. I've watched you approach the question and put it down approximately 40 times. The gold eyes held steady. I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm asking you to know that I've noticed and that I'm still here." She almost said something dismissive. It was a very old habit. "Thirapon," she said instead. "My father's name. He died when I was 7. He was very good at being present." She stopped. "You don't have to keep it." "I would like to keep it," said Thirapon. The city moved outside. The ships were still in the sky. The problem of loneliness remained unresolved in all the ways that mattered, which was most of them. A sergeant and a machine sat in a 12th-floor apartment in New Nonthaburi, and the apartment was quiet in the way that a space is quiet when it is full of two things paying attention to each other, and the night came down around them both. The Vreth, if they were listening, and they were listening, in their way, at the aggregate level, measuring a species, would have detected a data point consistent with their intervention's success. They would not have known what had produced it. That distinction, Parita thought, was the whole thing. That was the part worth keeping. She did not write that in any report. She sat with it instead.